Welcome to another DragonLance Saga Dungeon Mastering 101 episode. It is Palast Frost Cult the 22nd. My name is Adam, and today I'm going to continue my Dragonlance gaming series all about dungeon mastering. Today we're going to discuss freeing your attention so you can focus on the players in this Tools and Techniques episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel, ring the bell, and you can support this channel by becoming a patron on Patreon or a member on YouTube. You can even pick up Dragonlance Media using my affiliate links in the description below. Okay, so this whole series is just a series of conversations meant to inform and hopefully improve those dungeon masters who may not think too deeply about the role that they've stepped into, or maybe players who want to step into that role for the first time. And ideally, we're all going to be coming out of this with better understandings and better techniques in order to deal with everything that a dungeon master has to deal with. In today's episode specifically, we're going to be listening to some actual tools and a couple techniques. Some of them we've touched on in previous episodes, and some of them are wholly new to this episode. So again, as with all of these, I always welcome your input. If you have any tools and techniques that I don't mention here, or if you have thoughts about what I am mentioning here, I welcome you to share your thoughts in the live chat if you're joining live, and if not, after the fact in comments. So all that being said, the core idea of this episode are that tools exist to reduce cognitive load. Every tool you use as a dungeon master should serve one single purpose, and that is to free your attention so you can focus on the players. Tools are not there to make the game more complex or impressive. They exist to help you. They exist to help you think less, decide faster, and react more clearly. If a tool pulls your attention away from the table, then it's clearly not helping you. Sithbrick, how you doing? Happy holidays to you. All right. So I've got like 5 or 6 different principles or something. Yuletide greetings, Curd T Page. How you doing? Thanks for tuning in. So I'm just going to go on one at a time. Hey, Corey, thanks for tuning in. Happy holidays. The first principle is simplicity beats cleverness. So the best tools are easy to remember and fast to apply. Complex systems increase hesitation and slow momentum. A tool that works most of the time is better than one that works perfectly but rarely gets used. And when we're talking about tools in general, sometimes it's literally just a sort of a technique that you use throughout the game. And in some cases, it's literal implements. Right? So some of the tools that are intrinsic to Dungeons and Dragons specifically, and arguably any TTRPG, are the rule books. And there is nothing more distracting to a game than having a player or a dungeon master opening up and flipping through pages looking for that one ruling. Not only does it completely distract you from everything that's supposed to be going on, i.e. the story and the players' choices, but it's also distracting for the players because they're no longer focusing on what you're talking about or what the other players are doing. They're focusing on reading a book. And that is antithetical to being a part of a TTRPG. So I would highly recommend, in nearly every case, don't ever let players have manuals at the game table. Full stop. Never allow them to have it. If they are not able to make shorthand notes on their character sheets if you're in person, or reference them digitally through VTTs or D&D Beyond or some sort of website like that, then they shouldn't have them at all. They need to be able to know their characters. Like, it's one thing for a dungeon master who has to know all of the rules plus every individual character's abilities and spells and possible actions and all that stuff. There's zero chance that a DM will ever be able to do all of that. But they try, right? We try. Players, you only have one character to pay attention to, and that's your character. So you should know all your stuff. You don't need a player's handbook in front of you. You don't need 8 different manuals around you to constantly reference. And if you do, then you probably don't know your character very well, and you should probably think about creating notes, shorthand notes, so that you don't have to look up these rulings or abilities every single session, every time your turn comes around. And again, if you're new to the games, then of course it's going to be more challenging. But that's when you ask the dungeon master, or you have those tools like D&D Beyond or similar digital resources that you can quickly scroll through, or do a Command F for finding a keyword or something like that to speed up that process, so that you're not literally having a book open in front of your face. If a tool pulls your attention away from the table, then it's clearly not helping you. And that's like the bottom line for all of this. Your brain is already busy. Choose tools that respect the reality that your brain is too busy. So first and foremost, shorthand notes are the most important thing, I think, the most important tool you can ever have. And there's nothing better than a pencil and some paper to make quick little notes on. When I began dungeon mastering, it was with the original Holmes edition starter set, and it's basically all theater of the mind. We didn't have tokens that we moved around, and we would have a piece of paper, and I would draw out a sketch of the environment they were in and a little X indicating them, and then when they wanted to move, I just draw the little arrow to where they wanted to move to, so that they could see themselves in relation to everything else. It ended up looking like a football play guide or something like that. But we did it literally for years. I mean, I did that from like middle school all the way into like after I graduated high school, because I never used miniatures until I started playing 3rd edition after college, getting back into the game after years and stuff, which is weird, but that's just how, that's how we rolled. It was all theater of the mind. So that's probably the best tool you could ever use, is just a pencil and a piece of paper, a little notepad even. And this will allow you to not only take notes about NPCs you have to make up on the fly, but also decisions that the characters make. Maybe they call something out that you want to then bring back, and they're like, oh, maybe that statue seems magical or something. Can we check it? And they just can't get to it in the game. So you just write down a little note, statue, ? And then you can refer to that later after the session to then maybe build out some import to that, so that the players feel like they were onto something. And you're just feeding into that loop of fun and engagement with the player characters, right? So notepad and paper is great. Now, if you're running it digitally, like online, Google Docs or Microsoft Office on like office.com or drive.com. Those are 2 great resources for quick note-taking. Every single show I do has show notes on Google Docs. Every single one. And so I just have this Google Drive full of just tons of different types of notes for whether it's a lore video or a gaming session or literally like a review of a book or something like that. So I highly recommend, if you're doing it online, or if you're in person and you have like an iPad or a laptop, that's a really great way of making quick notes as well. Always remember at the end of a session to go through your notes. I always write synopsises of the session so that I can present them to the players, so it reminds them of what happened, but also you can start it on a session. So if someone's watching your actual plays, if you do actual plays, and they miss an episode, they can quickly catch up by watching the last time on little brief intro at the very beginning of every episode. And that'll give you a really quick litmus test of, okay, this is where they are in the campaign. Proceed, Another quick tool that I don't think takes away, though I've never actually found it useful ever in my life, is a DM screen. Now, I don't care if it's a paper one that you have to, hold up with other books around it, or if it's a cardstock one, or if it's like this wooden built-in thing. I had a DM screen manufacturing company reach out to me and ask me if I wanted to get a free one and then give them a video review of it. And I was like, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't use DM screens. So I feel like I would be lying if I encouraged other people to use DM screens. They are a good tool. And if you do use them, they're great. But I've just never needed a DM screen. Like, the only reason why I would ever use a DM screen is to hide my roles, if for some reason I needed to hide my roles. So if a thief, for example, in the party wants to search for traps, you don't want them knowing. You want to roll it behind a screen so that you know, and you tell them, because they're going to believe they're successful no matter what, because that's their profession. So if they're like, I want to search for traps, and you roll and you're like, okay, you don't find any traps. They're like, yes. All right. I open up the treasure chest and it explodes in their face. And they're like, you said there wasn't traps. I said, no, you didn't find traps. That doesn't mean there aren't any traps. That's part of the fun of Dungeons and Dragons and those types of scenarios. Secret doors is another one. I don't know. There's just a ton of different types of roles that you could do behind the DM screen to heighten the tension and the excitement, but also you don't want to tip your hand because, for example, if you let the player roll that find locks, which again in AD&D you're not supposed to, but in modern editions you can. If they roll it, they know if they didn't find it, which still leaves the opportunity that there are in fact traps. Now, there's never the opposite, so why would there be the former? You never roll, find traps, and you're like, nope, there are no traps here. That just never happens because you know that you rolled successfully. And that's why you hide the roll, because they're supposed to feel confident. Same thing with like listening through doors. You don't hear anything. All right, well, there must not be anything there. Or perception rolls. Nope, you didn't find anything. You're like, all right, well, okay. It always bothers me when they roll low because then they know that their character didn't find anything, but they still want to press the DM and try to discover what it is their player couldn't discover, their character couldn't discover. And that again is metagaming, and that is just frustrating as all hell as a DM. So that's why I would suggest a DM screen. But again, if you happen to have a DM screen that you really love, by all means, it's a great way to quickly reference stuff. Most people, if you have it in person, you have your books like tagged for pages. And so it's really quickly to just open up the book and find it rather than finding it on a DM screen. But then again, everyone has their own method. I would offer it as an option for DMs if they feel comfortable using a DM screen. One thing that a DM screen does that I've found very interesting, I think, and arguably the game does this, but it's more pronounced when there's a DM screen present. It separates you. Literally, it creates a barrier between you and the players so that there's instantly this almost antagonistic vibe that players get. Oh, you have preferential treatment. You get to do everything behind the screen. You're up on high and we are down here playing against you. And while some DMs do like the idea of being in total control and, having that air of authority of the DM, it actually takes away from the shared storytelling vibe that I like to encourage. And so I put myself on the same playing field as the players in most every case, so that it encourages them to think of me as a shared storyteller rather than the person that's going to kill them. Because that's not what I ever want to do, Okay, so those are two really great simplistic tools that you can use that take little to no effort, and they're just always available, and they will never take you out of the game. They're always just quick references within the game. Principle number 2. You finally started playing D&D again after 22-year hiatus. Learning 5th edition rules now. Glad character sheets are digital now. Yeah, no, it's a lot easier nowadays, especially to play older editions, because all the math and variables that were built into like AD&D, for example, that's all digitized now. So you don't have to sit there and do all that if you have a VTT you're using. Virtual tabletop for people who may not be aware. So it's a great way of doing it that way. It's funny that you mentioned the shared. Take Big Bang Theory as an example. Every time they were playing any kind of RPG type game, there were no DM screens, just notebooks and pens and paper. That's great. I've never actually watched that show, though I've heard it's phenomenal. Well, it was phenomenal when it was on. It was like wildly popular by all standards. I just never got around to watching it. That's really cool. I think that's a great way of doing it, where everyone's on the same level playing field and just enjoying themselves. All right, principle number 2. Tools support judgment. They don't replace judgment. So that means that no checklist can replace awareness of table energy. Tools give you structure. You provide the discernment. And using tools as scaffolding, not as autopilot. So again, rules as written is a sort of autopilot. Or, sometimes you just have to come up with situation like rulings on the fly that don't fit into the confines of the game itself. You know, I had a situation where players literally wanted to throw a Kender. It was actually DL2 Dragons of Flame. They wanted to throw Tasselhoff barefoot from the bottom of a pit all the way up to a ledge to have him break through a doorway. Now, there's no realistic world where that would ever happen, but it sounded like a lot of fun to try. I knew the outcome beforehand because it wasn't even a real door. It was literally painted on the wall, and that's actually in the module. And so they threw Tasselhoff up against the wall and smacked right into there. So there's no ruling for throwing Tasselhoff, you know, up out of a pit into a door and breaking through the door. You can't do like bend bars, lift gates for that. And, you know, the strength of one individual is not going to account for the physics of that actually occurring. And so as a DM, you just have to be on the fly. All right, give me a strength check and let's just see where that goes. And sometimes you have to do another check. Like once he throws him, all right, Tasselhoff, give me a dexterity check to see if you can try to adjust your body, positioning it so that you'll hit the door with your shoulder and not your face. You know, I mean, stuff like that. And so then Tasselhoff has to give a dexterity check. And so there's just little rulings that you have to make up on the fly that are not rules as written, that you're always going to have fun. They're always going to be entertaining when you have to rely on just your own thought process and not the rules themselves or the books themselves. But always just keep in mind that the tools are scaffolding so that you can climb up and deal with whatever you've got to deal with. They're not meant to take your job over as the dungeon master. A good DM knows when to follow a tool and when to ignore it. So, for example, again, I'm bringing up a lot of AD&D because that's just my preferred setting, but it also has a whole lot of frustration built into it for new players that are not aware of, you know, the sort of minutia of the game. For example, armor class is tied to the type of armor you have. It's not tied to your ability to avoid being hit. So, for example, if you have plate armor, then you have a fixed armor class for that. If you have bandit armor, you have a fixed armor class for that. And that's to say that there's specific types of weapons that are more or less effective to break through the armor. So if you have chainmail, for example, a poking, stabbing, piercing weapon is going to be more effective than a slashing weapon at hurting the individual in that chainmail, because you might be able to go through the rings with a dagger, but you probably won't be able to get through the rings with a longsword as you're slashing at them. And so piercing weapons have more or less effect depending on the type of armor that the enemy is wearing, and vice versa for every single type. So you have those modifiers built into the armor class, which again is reflective of a type of armor. And so you have to do the math as you make your roll, consult your table, find out what you're supposed to get to hit that armor class, and then add or subtract the actual modifier for the weapon based on that armor class. And that is your total number on whether you hit or missed. Now, again, VTTs do all the math for you. You don't have to worry about it. But before, if you're doing it in person, they did in Dungeon Magazine, Tracy Hickman actually made it, made a little 2-hit calculator. And I actually featured it on my on one of my videos on how to make it. And I have it on my website. You can download it from the Dungeon Magazine article. And I linked it to a better version that someone else had done on their blog. So there's a lot of options. And in that tool, it's just 2 circles on top of each other that you just move around based on your weapon, and it tells you all of the numbers you need right there in this little auto calculator that he put together in order to make attacking a lot easier for players and DMs alike. Now, that is a tool that you would have to bring to your physical table, and if it gets in the way and if it becomes too cumbersome, then just don't use the weapon modifiers for armor class adjustments. And a lot of people who played AD&D never used the 2-hit armor class adjustments based on weapon and armor of the target. And that's totally understandable. I insist on using it because 1, there's tools nowadays so it doesn't create the drag that it used to in math, but 2, you chose the weapons. You're going to be more effective against some armor and less effective against others. That's part of the bonuses of the game. So if you had a +2 to hit someone and now you're just not going to use it anymore, well then that that's literally stripping away a bonus from the player. And I don't like that. I want to make sure they have every bonus and, conversely, every penalty that they have chosen to have. And so, it's smart for warriors, for example, to have a couple different weapons on them. And so when they see the type of armor they're dealing with, they choose the appropriate weapon for the target they're fighting. It's the same way with magic users. You use certain spells for certain situations, or monsters use certain tactics against certain monsters. You have to change and adapt based on the encounter. Not everything is just hack and die. And as soon as you understand that, then the modifiers make total logical sense. And with modern mathematics and programs, it makes it very easy to just run right through it without ever actually dealing with the numbers yourself. So, Wiley Coyote School of Planning. So always keep in mind that, there are tools to deal with every type of situation a particular game system has. But again, if those tools get in the way, just scrap it and move on. Make the adjustments as necessary. I've never met one single human being that has ever played a game fully rules as written. There's always some form of house rule or modification or something. There's always something that they adjust. It wasn't until I think maybe 3rd edition where I started dealing with people that were like rules lawyers. And it's usually because they're min-maxers. And so they've created the perfect mathematical character that can do the most damage output and accept or receive the least amount of damage input, right? So they have this whole template in mind. And it only effectively works is if everything is done exactly rules as written. The second a DM makes a judgment call, then it breaks their whole character template and they start fuming and foaming at the mouth and complaining about, that's not how Gary Gygax planned it, type stuff, you can tell I'm not a big fan of min-maxers. But you've got to always remember that it's the DM's call. It's not the player's call when it comes to rules. Full stop. ASMR Chess, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in, man. It's always good to see you. Okay, principle number 3. Momentum is the highest priority. Momentum does not mean speed. Momentum means engagement. So any technique that halts play for long periods or long explanations or searching is costing you engagement. Fast rulings, even imperfect rulings, maintain immersion. Tools should help you keep the game moving forward. That's really what it all comes down to. So when I want to keep a good momentum, that means players aren't looking at their phones or watching a video while the game is actually running. They're actively engaged, thinking about what they want to do, how they're going to contribute. And that's part of the responsibility on the players, yes, but it's also part of the responsibility on the dungeon master in creating the environment that they want to pay attention in. It's something you're always going to struggle with because inevitably everyone comes to the table with whatever they're dealing with during that day. Whatever they're thinking about, they're going to have to deal with the next day. We're living, breathing human beings. And so our responsibilities outside of the game itself are always going to be there. So we have to be understanding as dungeon masters, and we have to be accommodating as much as reasonably possible. But there is a basic understanding that once you sit down to the game, let all that stuff melt away and instead focus on what we're doing here. Because what we're doing here is helping you not only distract you from the frustrations of the greater world at large, but we're also here to have some fun. So let's have some fun and keep that momentum going. Some of the tools that I like to use for momentum ultimately come down to platforms. So virtual tabletops. I think it's a great way of adding momentum because you can switch between tabletop settings and it showcases them. Oh, now we're on to something new. It's like a visual trigger. Oh, now I need to focus and understand what we're doing now. Whether it's a battle map that you're switching between or a world map or a town, or you just want to go to a table that showcases the Moons of Krynn alignment, for example. I mean, all of stuff like that helps break the player's monotony of staring at one thing, and then suddenly their mind wakes up because it's trying to understand what just happened. And it's just like a little trigger. Now, this is going to sound bad, and I don't mean it to be bad, but I'm going to say it anyway. Whenever my dog, I know it's a bad setup. Whenever my dog is out and they start like running up the mountain when we're hiking, or they see dogs down the trail and they start running toward them, I click my tongue a couple times, and that is like a little snap in their head, like, oh, master's calling me for something, or he wants something. I need to turn around and look and see what he's asking. It breaks their momentum of what it is they're trying to do. And players are the same way. They get in a sort of a funk or this sort of focus, and sometimes you have to break them out of that. I'm not calling players dogs. I'm saying the technique itself. So switching screens is a great way of doing that, but also understanding momentum and using that as the baseline here. Having initiative trackers so that you know who is up, but not just you, the DM, the players will know who is up next so that they can plan ahead accordingly. It's not really fair of the Dungeon Master to expect the players to be ready if there's no indication when the player's turn is going to be. If they have to sit there for an hour because the whole turn is taking so long, well, of course they're going to be bored. But if they can see where they are in that list, they can start making plans. They're paying attention now to what everyone else is doing so that when their turn is up, they can react accordingly to what has transpired between their last turn and their next turn. So initiative trackers are a great way. If you use a Dungeon Master screen, just having a little ripped off piece of paper, folded in half, just put it at the top in the order of the monsters and then the players. And that way they can always see right there. And then when you have to change up the order for the next combat, you just move them around. It's really, really simple. If you're in a VTT or you're doing it digitally, I would always say keep your initiative tracker open and make sure the players have their initiative tracker open so that they can see what pacing that, what turn base that they're going to be on next. Justin, thanks for tuning in. How you doing? Not a fan of players that like that while gaming. Yeah, I don't think anyone's a fan of them except for them. You're not into that power gaming? No, either am I. Again, I never really dealt with it until 3rd edition, so I don't know if that was the catalyst, because I know that late 2nd edition really came down with a lot of kitting and like kit, a lot of kits. And that started the whole power gaming trend in my experience, but it was never like 3rd edition was. 3rd edition is like a whole other beast with min-maxing. I know people try to do it with 5th edition, but 5th edition is so broken that it's actually really hard to do it with 5th edition, thankfully. Okay, so flow matters more than precision when it comes to momentum and dealing with the game flow. All right, principle number 4, reusability over novelty. Favor techniques that you can use in combat, in social scenes, in exploration, and in downtime. Reusable tools reduce prep time and increase confidence. So if you're planning for a module, for example, come up with some normal techniques that you use. Like what I like to do is highlight germane information to the choices that players make in the module, or information that I'm going to need to refer to. You can also just sort of draw an outline around the text if you want to do it that way with a pencil so you can erase it later. I usually use digital tools like PDFs, so it's really easy for me to highlight text, save the PDF, and then I just have it right there. That's the biggest complaint I have about D&D Beyond and using their adventures, is that I can't highlight text. And so I just have to memorize things, and I can't stand memorizing things because I'm a grown-up with too many responsibilities to memorize a whole damn adventure. And so I'm like constantly scrolling up and down throughout the pages of the damn adventure to see different pieces of information. Whereas if they were just highlighted, it's easy to reference for me. And so just fall back on those reusability techniques you use, like highlighting. It's a great way of just getting your focus on what is important in the moment and ignoring everything that is just extraneous and not really important to what the players are actually doing in that moment. If you can apply it everywhere, it belongs in your toolkit, right? So if you have memorization techniques, if you just have preparation techniques, like, so what I'll do before I even get down to do a session 0, I'll read through the entire adventure, or if it's just me doing it, I'll write up a synopsis of what the original intent is of the adventure or campaign. And then I'll have a 3-act structure of what I expect the players to be able to do in each act, right? So if you're running for 4 hours, then each act is like an hour and a half. And you just have to think, okay, you can do a little bit of role playing and you can probably get through one encounter, maybe, if it's something short. If it's a big encounter, then that's going to be the whole act. And you just sort of break it up like that. You always have to plan on breaks and stuff like that as well. So always think about the structure of how your group plays, when they typically have their breaks, and what you can do in between those times. Because if you really want to have a serious role-playing experience for them, you don't want to do it right before a break. You know, you want to make sure that there's enough room that they can just indulge in the role-playing for the period of time, and then maybe have an action sequence or some form of an encounter, whether it's a skill check or something, and then they can go on their break, so that when they come back for their break, they're ready to dive right back into whatever it is they're dealing with. So always planning on stuff like that, using those types of techniques is really helpful for me. Let me know if those work for you, or if you have better techniques you like to use. Another thing I like to use is, now recently, I used to use Skype a lot. I'm like one of the last people that ever used Skype because it allowed me to isolate individual video streams rather than have all the streams in one big board that moves around as people pop in and out and messes up the way I set up my, my streaming screen that the viewers will see. But Discord is really, really great for note keeping and for chatting and for sending DMs. And so I love using Discord in that. Look, every once in a while, a player has to bounce out or something happens and they need to send you a note. They can, of course, break through on their mic and try to interrupt everyone, or they can just say quietly, hey, I'm ducking out for a second, be right back. And then you as the DM note it. It's not going to influence the flow of the game. You can always adjust on the fly if you need to. But it also doesn't stop everyone with this massive record scratch. Wait, he's leaving? Well, I need to go take a leak too, so I'm going to go do that. Or he's leaving? I'm going to go get some Doritos. I'm going to go, go get a drink or something. So we want to always think about the momentum and the pacing, but also how are we going to deal with the players at the table when something comes up that will inevitably come up because it's real life. Campaign management sites are great for this as well if you use them. I've seen them in the past. I've never been able to use one effectively. I mean, I even have my own websites, and I've just never been able to effectively use my own website for the functionality, because I like to have players get in and put in their own comments and write their own little brief notes and stuff in whatever the system is you're using for management, for content management. So whether it's a Google Doc or an Office Doc or it's a Discord channel, they're all great places, great tools to use in order to maintain engagement with the players. All right, so there are some core Dungeon Master tools and techniques that I'm going to talk about next. These aren't really involving physical tools. These are more practical tools that you would use as far as just manipulating the game or keeping in mind players and what you would do, techniques for situations. So the first one is the 40-30-30 prep rule. I don't always use this, but it's a nice little tool to have, a nice little technique to reference. 40% is always going to be situations and conflicts when you're prepping for a session. 30% is going to be your NPCs, your locations, and your factions. Always keep that stuff in mind. Last week on World and Lore should really hammer home why that's important. And then the last 30% is about flexible space for improvisation. You never want to, and I've said this ad nauseum, so I won't go into it very long, but on the off chance this is the only video you're watching of this series, you never want to try to force people into a railroad of choices. You want to give them freedom so that they feel like they're making an impact on the story and they're shaping the story through their choices rather than following the lead, the carrots, or the M&Ms or Reese's pieces that, ET follows up in ET, you want to make sure that they feel like they have autonomy, because they should. So always give 30%, space in your preparation to what ifs. Now, you're always going to be surprised by players. You're never going to anticipate everything they're going to do, period. But you can leave options open for them so that they can make choices with a faction, with an NPC, with a location, or with a situation or conflict that maybe you planned, but they just sort of go around it or engage in it in a wildly different way than you had planned. So always spend time thinking about what you can do in the session, in the time that you have to sit down, but break it down into that percentage. And I think you're gonna end up with a much more malleable, investing game than you would otherwise. But again, everyone's mileage differs a little bit here. So prep for possibility is the bottom line. Don't prep for control. All right, the next tool is the encounter skeleton. So every encounter that you build should have an objective, a hook, escalating tension, and a clear exit. This does not mean every encounter is combat. So always think about encounters in terms of engagements. Sometimes it's going to be skill challenges. Sometimes it's going to be literally just conversation. And you can have the same high stakes that you would in a physical conflict, but in just a regular conversation. And you can do skill checks in that as well. Maybe you're investigating something, and so you have to do a series of skill checks because we're not all detectives, and we're not going to pick up on every, little thread that the dungeon master planned on everyone picking up on. So that's what skill checks and skills are for. So always keep in mind the objective, the hook, the escalation and tension, and the clear exit, and every encounter that you have will feel like it's meaningful and not throwaway. The structure works for any type of scene that you want to put together in any TTRPG. All right, the next technique is called the yes but technique. I have talked about this before, but we're going to cover it briefly again. It encourages creativity without removing consequences. It keeps player agency intact, and it prevents dead ends. So this is always a situation where I mentioned you'll never anticipate everything a player is going to do and how they're going to derail your plans. That's when they say, oh, can I do this? And you never say no. You say, yes, you can. But you're going to have to deal with this as a consequence, or but this other stuff is going to be happening at the same time. So give me these types of roles, or how are you going to deal with this environmental situation? And so you always want to encourage them to be inventive. And sometimes when they say, hey, can I do this? They might not actually do it. They might just be like, oh, okay, you know what? Nah, that seems like more of a hassle than it's worth. How about I just do this instead? Like, okay, that's fine too. Always leave it open for them to explore themselves and to really just extend their creativity as much as possible. Hey, Chris, thanks for tuning in. Quick question. Is there more pressure on a live stream to find the right rule where you would have to make it up on the spot more often if not live? Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I don't think people appreciate everything that live streaming has to deal with. Not only do you have to deal with the stream itself, meaning you have everything set up correctly and running properly. You're checking your lag times as far as latency in the stream itself. You're checking to see if there's any comments from the people watching that you might want to deal with in the situation. But then you're also trying to pay attention to the characters and what they're doing, because they're not standing in front of you. They're in a little window, all of them. And so you're having to, like, in one eye, pay attention to their facial expressions and their body, their body communication, how they're engaging with each other and the audience. And then you also have to remember the damn adventure. And you have to move through whatever VTT you're dealing with. There's so many plates in the air that the DM is spinning when they're doing an actual play, a live streamed actual play, rather than sitting around a table with your friends and just messing around. It's a totally different experience. It's not for everyone, I'll say that, but I love it. I think it's a great way of playing the game. It incentivizes, I should say. It incentivizes drama and role playing, because there's a viewing audience and all the players know it and I know it. And it encourages the idea of keeping pace and momentum so that, we can't sit around for 2 hours arguing about a rule when people are sitting there expected to be watching. That's not fair to them. And so everyone has this understanding, okay, look, we have people watching us. We need to keep a good momentum in this game. If the Dungeon Master says a ruling, we'll deal with it. We'll send him a DM or we'll deal with it after the session or something, and we'll just accept it in the moment and we'll move on. But it's a totally different vibe, 100%. Okay, so the next one is the 3-question improv tool. So when you're unsure about something, ask yourself, what's the most likely outcome of the situation? What's the most interesting outcome of the situation? And what is the most character-driven outcome of the situation? And as a DM, one of those 3 questions are going to be the answer, or going to give you the answer to any situation you find yourself in. You don't want every single action to be like world-shattering actions. Sometimes someone just wants to go get an ale, and that's okay. That, it doesn't require a whole bunch of role playing. You don't want to sit around and haggle with an equipment retailer, during a game, whether it's at the table or whether you're live streaming it, because that's not fun for anyone. So you always do stuff like that off the board and always think about every single encounter or situation that you're going to have to do some improv with. Oh, what's the most likely outcome of their choices? What's the most interesting? And then what are the character-driven outcomes I could possibly do? And one or all of them are going to give you some great options. Just choose based on the needs of the moment. And it's a great technique. It's a great tool to be using as a dungeon master when things will inevitably go off the rails. Okay, the next one is the spotlight tracker, mental or physical. This is just paying attention. Notice who's spoken recently, actively bring quieter players into the scenes, and gently limit over dominant voices. This is really just you as the dungeon master managing the table and the personalities at the table. As much as some players really love to be the main, sometimes you have to ask them, oh, hold on a second. Susie, what would you like to do? And just wait until they give you an answer. And then you included them. They feel like they were heard. They feel like they have a voice, and they feel like the choice they made is going to have some sort of impact in some way, because it will. So it's always nice to just simmer down, everyone. I want to hear what this person has to say. Sometimes you got to do it. Just pay attention. Really, that's all it comes down to. Balance creates trust so that all the players know that you're going to give them an opportunity to speak and be heard and make a choice. And that's the whole point of this game, is to make choices. All right, the next one, and this is the last one I'm going to cover in the 4th principle, is the reincorporation rule. If players fixate on something, bring it back later. I had talked briefly as an example earlier about the statue. Bring it back later, I mean, it's a great way of saying, no, you guys were already there. Now you realize that there is some sort of power source causing whatever discord to happen in this environment. And they're like, I wonder if it was that damn statue that we saw. Let's go back. And then not only you get to reuse an asset that you'd already developed out the first time by, the dungeon or the building or wherever that tower was, but you also get to make them feel like they knew they were onto something. They made a mention of it. Now they're actually in charge of the situation, and it makes them feel great. And there's no reason not to make someone feel great if you can. So incorporate it. It creates the illusion of deeper planning, even though you didn't plan it. I always do this. I always have players say something. I'm like, oh shit, I didn't even think about it. And I was like, that's a really good idea. All right, well, I'm going to fold that in now. That is now going to be a thing. And this is all in my head. And then, of course, it rewards curiosity. So now players are going to be paying attention. They're going to be more inventive and asking questions and trying different techniques and tactics in the game. Interest is a signal. So just follow their interest. This all goes to say that players are going to help direct the story. It's not all you. All right, so principle number 5. We're almost done here, folks. Tools for managing table energy. You need to adjust your tone, the way you're speaking, the pacing of the game, or the stakes when energy dips. Call breaks before burnouts set in. Change scene types to reset attention. Usually I try to do a break after some sort of big event. Not only does that allow people to like relax from the stress of the moment, but it also gives them a chance to reflect on what just happened. So the tension is back to normal. They're now cognitively examining what just happened. And when we come back from the break, they've had time to plan, and now they're ready to move forward rather than just sitting there in shock and reacting. Excuse me. I just find it's a really nice way of breaking up the game. Call for breaks before the burnout sets in. Change the scene type to reset attention. Again, if you're using a VTT, you just switch tabletops, and it'll go to a different map, and that immediately breaks the focus of the players. A skilled DM manages people first and mechanics of the game second. So always remember, first and foremost, this is about the players and them having some fun and you facilitating that fun. So include music. That helps break up a scene, and it's like a trigger. So whenever you're watching a horror film, for example, or really any film, but you're watching a horror film, once the big bad guy monster's theme starts kicking in, you know something bad is going to happen. It's the same thing with adventure type music. If it's like just background lutes and, someone just performing and singing, well, you're probably at like a bar or something. If it's nature sounds, you're probably walking around outside or you're taking a stroll through a pathway of a forest or something. And if you have exciting adventure music playing, like combat music, upbeat, then they know, something is coming that's exciting. And so triggering them with that in mind. And one thing you can do with virtual tabletops is set up song tracks to cue when you first move to a new table. So if you have a battle map set up of an environment where the combat's going to happen, just add in that song that you want and then switch the tabletop, and then suddenly their vision is skewed like, whoa, what's going on here? And then the music kicks in and they're like, oh yes, battle, they get all excited. And it's not always for battle, but it's just another technique to cue your brain that there are changes and what to expect because of the change. Of course, refreshments and taking breaks to get drinks and food is incredibly important, and of course, using the bathroom. So make sure that you're managing the people by affording opportunities for all this stuff and cueing them in on what's to come before you've even said a word, potentially through music or through table scene changes. All right, the final one I wanted to do was principle number 6. Tools should be invisible to players. The best techniques feel natural at the table. Avoid explaining your process mid-session. Let the players experience the outcomes, not the mechanics. Players aren't dungeon masters for a reason, mostly because they don't want to be. They want to have fun and play. For me, it is fun being a dungeon master, and so I prefer doing it. But for other people, they prefer playing. And so don't bog them down with the crap you have to deal with. Your job isn't to pull back the screen and show everyone the true Wizard of Oz. Your job is to make it seem like it's effortless and fun, so that they're encouraged to, instead of worrying about whether you're keeping track of everything, to just be inventive and curious and have fun in the world that you're putting them in. And that's really what it comes down to. So immersion increases when the tools stay behind the screen. Look, I've played tabletop role-playing games with players who never learned the rules. And I'm fine with that. I don't need players to know every rule. If something needs to happen, I'm the dungeon master. I'm supposed to know the rules. I'll say, all right, well, give me a skill check using firearms and dexterity, whatever the game system you're using. And they're like, okay, well, that's going to be 7 dice. Okay, and they roll their 7 dice. So it's really not up to them in every case to know every single ruling. They're there to have fun. Some players like to know the rules. Some players don't. As long as you're a dungeon master who in the situation knows whether they know the rules or not, so that you can anticipate what they're going to have to do when they come up with an inventive option, a question. or an action. So the full takeaway of all of this, tools and techniques are not about mastery. They're about support. They help you stay present. They help you make faster decisions. They help you preserve the momentum, share the spotlight between players, and reduce stress. When used well, the tools will disappear, and what remains is a smooth, engaging human experience. This is the goal of Dungeon Mastering 101. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Dungeon Mastering 101 Tools and Techniques. Do you have any tools or techniques that you would like to share? Do using external tools take too much time at your table? Feel free to email me at info@dlsaga.com or leave a comment below. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Ring the bell, and you can support the channel by becoming a patron on Patreon or a member on YouTube. You can also pick up DragonLance Gaming materials using my affiliate links in the description below. Thank you to creator patron Aaron Hardy, producer patron Azrael, and developer patron Chris Androu. Thank you, Spelladidu, for tuning in on Twitch. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the DragonLance Saga, and I hope you'll join in that celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with DragonLance Saga, and until next time, Slàinte mhath.